Courtroom 304 smelled of lemon polish and bitter resentment. Richard slid the divorce settlement across the oak table, his mistress practically glowing beside him. They thought leaving the quiet housewife destitute was a victory. They had no idea she secretly owned the ground they walked on. Manhattan Family Court was a place where love went to die, but today it felt more like a corporate slaughterhouse. The rain lashed furiously against the tall, arched windows of Judge Thomas Harrison's courtroom, casting long, weeping shadows across the hardwood floor. At the petitioner's table sat Richard Belmont. He was a picture of modern arrogance, draped in a bespoke charcoal Tom Ford suit, his cufflink catching the dim light every time he checked his $150,000 Patek Philippe Nautilus watch. He was a man who believed he had conquered the world. And sitting right behind him in the gallery, wearing a smirk that could cut glass, was Victoria Kensington. Victoria was everything Elena supposedly wasn't: loud, connected, and dripping in flashy designer labels. She was a junior executive at Morgan Stanley, and she hadn't stopped whispering in Richard's ear for the past 18 months. She wore a Cartier Panzer necklace apiece Elena recognized instantly, not because it was famous, but because Elena's own private shopper had sourced it for Richard to give to his mother 3 years ago. The fact that it now rested on Victoria's collarbone was a quiet, sickening testament to Richard's deceit. Across the aisle at the respondent's table sat Elena. She wore a simple, unbranded beige trench coat over a modest navy dress. Her hair was pulled back into a neat, unassuming bun. She had no entourage, no aggressive bulldog of a lawyer barking objections. She sat completely still, her hands folded neatly in her lap. To the casual observer, she looked like a deer caught in the headlights, a traditional stay-at-home wife who was about to be discarded after her husband hit the jackpot. Richard's lawyer, Arthur Pendleton, a man who looked like he had been born in a Brooks Brothers catalog and fed entirely on corporate blood, was currently pacing before the judge. "Your Honor," Pendleton began, his voice dripping with condescension. "My client, Mr. Belmont, is the founder and CEO of Apex Dynamics. Over the last 5 years, he has built this tech firm into a juggernaut recently valued by Forbes at roughly $400 million. He has shed blood, sweat, and tears to achieve this American dream." Pendleton paused, turning a theatrical gaze of pity toward Elena. During this entire period, Mrs. Belmont, soon to be Mrs. Harrington, again contributed absolutely nothing to the financial standing of this household. She baked sourdough. She tended to a garden. She did not draft a single line of code, nor did she secure a single venture capital meeting. Therefore, the proposed settlement of a one-time alimony payment of $200,000 alongside the deed to the 2018 Volvo SUV is more than generous. Judge Harrison peered over his reading glasses, clearly uncomfortable with the predatory nature of the terms. "Mr. Pendleton, this is a marriage of 10 years. New York is an equitable distribution state. You are asking the respondent to waive all rights to discovery and accept a fraction of a percent of the marital estate. Because the estate was built solely by my client, Your Honor," Pendleton fired back smoothly. "Furthermore, my client is assuming all marital debt. Miss Harrington is walking away clean. It is a clean break, which is exactly what both parties need." Richard leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He didn't even look at Elena. He looked at the clock. He had a celebratory dinner booked at Le Bernardin in 3 hours, and this housewife nuisance was cutting into his schedule. "Elena," Richard suddenly spoke, his voice carrying across the quiet room. He used the tone one might use to scold a slow child. "Let's not drag this out. You know as well as I do that you don't understand how the real world works. You don't know the first thing about capital gains, asset management, or corporate restructuring. I'm giving you a soft landing. Take the money. Go back to Ohio. Start a bakery." Victoria let out a soft, audible giggle from the gallery. Elena finally lifted her head, her eyes a sharp, piercing hazel, locked onto Richard. There were no tears in them. There wasn't even anger. There was just a profound, chilling emptiness. For a decade, she had played the role he needed her to play. When he came home crying because his first startup failed, she had quietly liquidated a small portion of her anonymous trust fund to silently invest in his second venture through a shell company managed by Goldman Sachs. She had paid for his tailored suits when he couldn't afford rent. She had let him believe he was the master of his universe because his fragile ego demanded it. And this was the thanks she got: a $200,000 payout and an insult. "You believe this is fair, Richard?" Elena asked, her voice soft but steady. "I believe it's what you earned," Richard replied coldly. "I'm a busy man, Elena. Victoria and I have a flight to St. T. Bart's tonight. Sign the papers." The bailiff walked over, carrying the thick stack of legal documents on a wooden clipboard. He placed it gently in front of Elena. The top page was glaring: waiver of full financial discovery and irrevocable asset separation. By signing this, Elena would legally declare that she accepted the terms, that she would not pursue any further investigation into Richard's finances, and crucially that from this moment forward, what was in Richard's name belonged solely to Richard, and what was in Elena's name belonged solely to Elena. Pendleton stepped forward, uncapping a sleek silver Montblanc pen and offering it to her. "Initial the bottom of pages 4 through 9 and a full signature on page 12. The courtroom was suffocatingly silent. Judge Harrison leaned forward. "Ms. Pass Harrington, I must remind you that you have the right to retain counsel. If you sign this document today, waiving your right to discovery, you are legally binding yourself to these terms. It will be incredibly difficult to overturn this in the future." "She knows what she's doing, Your Honor," Richard interrupted, his patience wearing razor thin. "She just wants this over with, right, Elena?" Elena looked down at the paper. She traced the edge of the page with her index finger. She thought about the early days, when Richard used to look at her with adoration rather than contempt. She thought about how the money, the little bit he actually knew about, had poisoned him. He had become a monster fueled by validation and greed. He thought his $400 million tech company made him a titan of industry. He didn't know that Apex Dynamics' primary server infrastructure was leased from a subsidiary of Axiom Global. He didn't know that Axiom Global was the largest private equity conglomerate on the Eastern Seaboard. And he certainly didn't know that the sole, undisputed majority shareholder of Axiom Global was sitting across from him in a beige trenchcoat. "Richard," Elena said, her voice echoing slightly in the vast room. She looked up, holding his gaze. "I want to be absolutely clear. Once I sign this, everything in your name remains yours, and everything in my name remains mine. We part ways completely, no claims on future earnings. No claims on hidden assets." "Yes, Elena, for God's sake," Richard snapped, rolling his eyes. "That is what the document says. What's mine is mine. What's yours is yours. We are legally, financially, and permanently severed. Now sign the damn paper." "Very well." Elena took the Montblanc pen from Pendleton. She didn't hesitate. Her hand moved swiftly across the heavy stock paper. "Initial page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9. She flipped to the back. On page 12, right above the thick black line, she signed her full legal name, Elena Elizabeth Harrington. The loud scratching of the nib seemed to echo off the walls. She capped the pen and slid the clipboard back across the table. A massive, visible sigh of relief escaped Richard's lips. He immediately turned around and shot a triumphant wink at Victoria. Pendleton snatched the clipboard up like a dog grabbing a bone. "Excellent," Pendleton said, quickly inspecting the signature. "Your Honor, we ask that you enter this settlement into the record." Judge Harrison looked at Elena with a mixture of sorrow and disappointment. He raised his heavy wooden gavel. "Very well. Let the record show that the petitioner and respondent have agreed to the terms. I will sign the decree. Court is ad. Objection, Your Honor." The voice didn't come from Elena. It came from the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom. The doors had swung open so violently they crashed against the mahogany walls, sending a shockwave through the room. Striding down the center aisle was a man in an immaculate navy pinstripe suit. He carried a leather briefcase that looked older than the judge himself. He possessed an aura of absolute terrifying authority. Richard spun around, scowling. "Who the hell is this?" "My name is David Rosenthal," the man boomed, his voice rich and commanding. He was a senior partner at Kirtland & Ellis, a law firm that ate lawyers like Pendleton for breakfast. Flanking him were two men in sharp gray suits carrying massive stacks of ledger binders, forensic accountants from Deloitte. Pendleton practically jumped in front of his client. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The proceedings are concluded. The papers are signed. I am not here to contest the divorce, Mr. Ball." "Pendleton," Rosenthal said smoothly, walking past the bewildered attorney and taking his place right next to Elena. He bowed his head slightly toward her. "My deepest apologies for my tardiness, Miss Harrington. The final transfers from the Cayman trusts took longer than anticipated due to the storm." "It's fine, David," Elena said, her voice entirely different now. Gone was the meek, quiet whisper. Her tone was sharp, icy, and dripping with authority. She stood up, slowly unbuttoning her beige trench coat and shrugging it off. Underneath, she wasn't wearing a simple navy dress. She was wearing a razor-sharp, custom-tailored Alexander McQueen power suit. Richard blinked, utterly confused. "What? What is going on? Who is this guy, Elena? How did you hire a lawyer from Kirkland?" Rosenthal ignored Richard completely and addressed the judge. "Your Honor, as the ink is now dry on the permanent asset separation agreement, my client, Miss Wang Harrington, is legally shielded from any claims by Mr. Belmont regarding her personal estate. I am here to formally file the necessary disclosures for the public record, as her change in marital status affects several publicly traded entities." "Publicly traded entities?" Judge Harrison asked, leaning forward, suddenly very intrigued. "Mr. Rosenthal, what exactly is the nature of your client's estate?" Richard let out a harsh bark of laughter. "Her estate? She has a checking account with $3,000 in it and a vintage mixer." Rosenthal slowly opened his ancient leather briefcase. He pulled out a thick, gold-embossed folder and handed it to the bailiff, who carried it up to the judge. "Your Honor," Rosenthal said, his voice ringing through the silent courtroom, "my client, Elena Elizabeth Harrington, is the sole heiress and acting chairwoman of Axiom Global Holdings. Her personal net worth, verified this morning by our partners at Deloitte and representatives from Goldman Sachs, is currently estimated at $14.6 billion. The silence that fell over courtroom 304 was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens right after a bomb goes off, before the sound waves hit your ears. Richard's face drained of all color. He looked like he had been struck by lightning. His jaw hung slack. Behind him, Victoria let out a pathetic, strangled gasp, her hand flying up to clutch her Cartier necklace. 14 billion? Pendleton squeaked, sounding like a deflating balloon. Elena turned to look at Richard. The smirk that had lived on his face for the past 18 months was entirely gone, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. "You wanted a clean break, Richard," Elena said, her voice like cracking ice. "You wanted us to walk away with exactly what was in our names." "I completely agree." She gestured to the signed papers in Pendleton's trembling hands. "You keep your little startup, and I will keep my empire." The suffocating silence in courtroom 304 was finally broken by a sound that resembled a dying engine sputtering to a halt. It was Richard Belmont trying to laugh. "This is a joke," Richard choked out, his eyes darting frantically between Elena, the towering figure of David Rosenthal, and the judge. He ran a trembling hand over his face. "This is some kind of sick, elaborate prank. You hired actors, Elena? Is this what you spent my alimony on?" "Mr. Belmont," Judge Harrison warned, his voice grave. He was currently flipping through the gold-embossed ledger Rosenthal had handed him. The judge's eyes grew wider with every page he turned. "I assure you, a senior partner at Kirkland & Ellis does not participate in practical jokes. Furthermore, these are authenticated SEC Form 4 filings, stamped bank guarantees from Goldman Sachs, and certified offshore trust declarations countersigned by Deloitte. This is staggering." Arthur Pendleton, Richard's lawyer, looked as though he was going to vomit all over the mahogany table. His pristine Brooks Brothers-clad shoulders slumped. He lunged forward, desperately grabbing the edge of the judge's bench. "Your Honor, this is unconscionable. This is textbook fraud. Ms. Harrington willfully concealed marital assets of astronomical proportions. We demand this settlement be voided immediately. The petitioner has a right to 50% of the marital estate." David Rosenthal didn't even raise his voice. He didn't have to. "On what grounds, Mr. Pendleton?" "Fraud? There was no fraud. My client sat perfectly still while you drafted, presented, and aggressively pushed for a permanent waiver of full financial discovery. She hid $14 billion, Pendleton shrieked, his professional composure entirely shattered. "She didn't hide anything," Rosenthal countered, stepping closer to Richard's table. "You simply never asked. In your arrogance, you assumed she had nothing. You explicitly demanded she waive her right to look into Mr. Belmont's offshore accounts, and in doing so, you legally bound him to the exact same terms. Page 2, paragraph 4 of your own document. Both parties irrevocably waive the right to any and all future discovery of assets, known or unknown, and agree that all assets held in their individual names shall remain their sole and separate property. You brought the rope, Mr. Pendleton. Your client merely tied the noose." Judge Harrison took off his reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Mr. Pye, Rosenthal is entirely correct. Mr. Pendleton, I explicitly warned you and your client about the dangers of a blind waiver of discovery. I asked if you were sure. Mr. Belmont insisted. The ink is dry. The decree is entered into the record. New York state law is exceedingly clear on this matter." Richard fell back into his chair as if he had been physically struck. His breath was coming in short, panicked gasps. In the gallery, the dynamic had violently shifted. Victoria Kensington, the Morgan Stanley Jr. executive who had been wearing her stolen victory like a crown, was now ashen. The smirk had been surgically removed from her face. Her eyes darted from Richard to Elena, doing the rapid, brutal mental math of a Wall Street opportunist. She had hitched her wagon to a man she thought was a titan, only to realize he had just signed away half of a $14 billion empire for a used Volvo. Elena finally stepped out from behind the respondent's table. The beige trench coat lay discarded on her chair, a shed skin. In her tailored Alexander McQueen suit, she commanded the room. She walked slowly toward Richard, the rhythmic click of her Louboutin heels echoing like a ticking clock. "Why?" Richard whispered, his voice cracking. He looked up at her, tears of pure panic pooling in his eyes. "Alina, why? We were married for 10 years. How could you lie to me for a decade?" "I didn't lie, Richard. I omitted," Elena said, her voice eerily calm. "When we met at Columbia, you were brilliant. You had fire. I was the sole heiress to the Axiom global fortune after my grandfather passed. I had spent my entire youth surrounded by sycophants, wealth managers, and men who looked at me and saw nothing but a bank vault. I wanted a normal life. I wanted someone who loved me." She paused, looking down at him with an expression of clinical detachment. "And for a while, you did. But then you started your first company. You became obsessed with status. When that company failed, you were suicidal. So I quietly reached out to my wealth managers. I had them set up a shell corporation to inject $3 million into your next venture. I bought your success, Richard, because I loved you and I wanted you to be happy. Richard's mouth opened and closed like a suffocating fish. You funded my seed round. I funded your seed round. I funded your Series A. I bought the building your headquarters is located in through a proxy, Elena stated, listing the facts with lethal precision. I let you believe you were a self-made genius because your fragile, pathetic ego couldn't handle anything else. But instead of being grateful for your success, the money turned you into a monster. You started sleeping with junior executives. You started hiding money in the Cayman's money, ironically, that originated from my trust fund. You treated me like a servant in my own life. Elena leaned over the table, bringing her face inches from his. So when you served me with divorce papers and demanded I walk away with nothing, I decided to give you exactly what you asked for. A clean break. Richard was hyperventilating now, the crisp tailoring of his Tom Ford suit suddenly looking more like a tailored straitjacket. He grabbed Arthur Pendleton's sleeve, shaking the older lawyer with a frantic, uncoordinated desperation. Do something. Arthur, fix this. Subpoena the records, file an appeal, cite mental distress. Do something. You told me this was ironclad. It is ironclad, Richard, Pendleton whispered, his voice hollow and entirely devoid of its earlier courtroom bluster. The lawyer wasn't looking at his client. He was staring blankly at the mahogany table, already mentally calculating the apocalyptic malpractice suit that was about to end his distinguished career. There is no appeal. You explicitly waived discovery against my warnings on the record. You signed the permanently binding separation agreement. She outplayed us. Legally, you are trapped in a cage of your own design. It gets substantially worse, Richard, Elena said. She stood completely upright now, radiating a cold, untouchable authority. She signaled to one of the Deloitte accountants standing behind her. The man stepped forward silently, handing Elena a sleek, matte black iPad. She tapped the screen with perfectly manicured fingers before placing it flat on the respondent's table, spinning it around so her ex-husband could see the screen. "What is this?" Richard asked, his voice trembling so violently he could barely form the words. He stared at the screen. It was a live Bloomberg terminal feed, layered with a highly classified corporate debt structure chart that only sweet executives should have possessed. "This is reality," Elena replied, her tone clinical and detached. "You see, Richard, your precious company, Apex Dynamics, was indeed valued at $400 million by Forbes. But that valuation is based almost entirely on projected user growth in your proprietary algorithm. It willfully ignores your catastrophic debt-to-equity ratio." She reached out and tapped the screen again, expanding a specific node on the financial tree. 2 years ago, when you decided you needed to aggressively expand into the European market to inflate your IPO prospects, you took out a $50 million mezzanine loan. You secured that massive injection of capital through a private equity firm called Blue Horizon Capital. Richard swallowed hard, a thick drop of cold sweat rolling down his temple and staining his collar. "Yes, so what? We have never missed a payment. We are current on the interest. Blue Horizon Capital is a wholly owned Tier 1 subsidiary of Axiom Global Holdings," Elena said, the words falling like heavy iron anvils onto the courtroom floor. "I own your debt, Richard. I have always owned your debt. And if you had bothered to read the fine print of your loan agreement, which I know you didn't, because you always leave the tedious details to the little people while you play visionary, there is a standard morality and key man risk clause embedded in Section 4. And no." Pendleton's head snapped up, his legal mind finally catching up to the slaughter. "A morality clause. Precisely, Mr. Pendleton," David Rosenthal interjected smoothly, adjusting his cuffs. It explicitly stipulates that if the CEO's personal actions bring public disgrace, severe ethical compromise, or sudden financial instability to the firm's leadership, the lender reserves the right to call the entire loan due immediately. Richard turned the color of wet ash. You can't do that. That's insane. It would bankrupt the company overnight. We don't have $50 million in liquid cash to just hand over. I'm acutely aware of your liquidity issues, Elena smiled, a chilling, terrifying expression that didn't reach her hazel eyes, which means Axiom Global will seize Apex Dynamics as assets in foreclosure by the end of the business week. Your patents, your code, your office furniture, all of it becomes mine. You're systematically destroying his company, Pendleton gasped, horrified by the sheer scale of the ambush. I'm foreclosing on a distressed asset, Elena corrected him smoothly, brushing a piece of invisible lint from her Alexander McQueen lapel. But wait, Richard. I promised you a clean break, and I believe in thoroughness. Apex Dynamics hosts roughly 95% of its cloud infrastructure on servers leased from Zephyr Cloud Solutions. Guess who owns Zephyr? Richard squeezed his eyes shut. His breath hitched in his throat. Axiom. Correct again, Elena said cheerfully. Your server lease officially expires at midnight tonight. As the acting chairwoman of the board, I have directed Zephyr's management team to formally decline the renewal of your contract. At exactly 12:01 a.m., your servers go dark. You cannot migrate an infrastructure of that size in 12 hours. Your platform will crash globally. Your users will be permanently locked out. Your stock, the stock you so fiercely protected and hoarded in this divorce settlement, will plummet to absolute zero before the opening bell rings tomorrow morning. The courtroom was deadly quiet. Even Judge Harrison sat frozen on his elevated bench, completely mesmerized by the absolute surgical dismantling of a human being's entire existence. You're ruined, Richard, Elena said softly, leaning forward. You built your little tech empire on a plot of land that I legally own, using bricks that I bought for you and breathing air that I permitted you to breathe. And today your lease is up. I am evicting you. Elena, please, Richard begged, all his practiced arrogance, all his billionaire posturing melting away into pathetic, raw desperation. His legs gave out. He fell to his knees right there on the polished hardwood of courtroom 304, reaching out and clutching clumsily at the hem of her tailored trousers. Please, I was stupid. I was blind. I was out of my mind. I'm sorry. I'll fire Victoria. I'll leave her right now. I swear to God, we can fix this. We can go to therapy. I love you. At the frantic mention of her name, Victoria Kensington abruptly stood up in the gallery. The loud clatter of her heels breaking the silence made everyone look at her. She grabbed her Hermes Birkin bag, another extravagant gift secretly funded by Elena's invisible hand, and angrily adjusted her Cartier necklace. She didn't look at Richard with an ounce of sympathy. She looked at him with the absolute, calculating disgust of a parasite realizing its host was dead. A bankrupt tech bro with a $50 million defaulted loan in a crashed company was completely useless to her upwardly mobile ambitions. Without uttering a single word, Victoria turned on her heel and sprinted out the heavy mahogany courtroom doors, the sound of her rapid footsteps echoing down the hall. Richard watched her leave, his mouth hanging open as the final pillar of his grand delusion crumbled into fine dust. He was entirely alone. Get up off the floor, Richard, Elena commanded, taking a step back so his hands fell empty to the ground. It's pathetic, and it's ruining the aesthetic of my victory. She turned away from him, addressing David Rosenthal and her team of accountants. Gentlemen, file the disclosures with the SEC immediately. Initiate the formal loan recall with Blue Horizon, and send the server termination notice to Apex's legal department by courier. We are done here. With immense pleasure, Miss Harrington, Rosenthal said, snapping his vintage leather briefcase shut with a resounding click. Elena finally turned to the bench. "Thank you for your time and patience today, Your Honor. I sincerely apologize for the theatrics, but my ex-husband has a notorious flair for the dramatic. I felt it was only appropriate to match his energy for our final goodbye." Judge Harrison simply nodded, still looking utterly stunned as he closed the gold-embossed ledger. "Court is adjourned. Ms. Harrington, good luck to you." Elena didn't look back as she walked down the center aisle. She left Richard Belmont sobbing on his knees, surrounded by the signed divorce papers that had secured his absolute doom. She pushed open the heavy wooden doors and stepped out into the marble corridor. The storm outside had finally broken, and brilliant, piercing sunlight was streaming through the high courthouse windows, illuminating her path forward. She wasn't just a free woman anymore. She was a titan awakened. Did you love seeing justice served cold? If Elena's ultimate revenge against her cheating husband left you speechless, hit that like button right now. Share this story with anyone who needs a reminder that karma never misses. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more jaw-dropping, real-life drama, thrilling betrayals, and absolute comebacks. Drop a comment below. What would you have done in Elena's shoes?